Hello, my name is Raymond and this is my current event presentation. Today, I will be presenting about the coronavirus reopening protests. As we all know, the coronavirus pandemic has made a huge impact on our lives. We were forced to go home from DC, businesses deemed non-essential all over the country are closed, and social distancing is limiting where we go and who we see as well. In these extremely difficult times, our nation's leaders have stressed that we must persist in staying home and limiting our contact with others as much as possible. Recently in the news, however, there have been stories about protests taking place in countless different states, filled with angry individuals that wish to reopen the economy in the middle of a pandemic. In this presentation, I look forward to discussing on a political, psychological level why these Americans are expressing their right to protest, and some ideas of what we could do to help. I believe that the best place to start when attempting to look at why people are protesting is to first look at the current state of our country. The latest unemployment data has our country at over 26 million unemployed, which is over 20% of all working Americans. This is essentially an unprecedented number, certainly more unemployed than we have ever experienced at a single time in history, and the percentages were only ever this high during the Great Depression. Countless businesses have been forced to close by the government in an effort to slow the spread of the virus, and the shaky economy has led to an unstable stock market. One of the most notable protests so far was in Frankfort, Kentucky on Wednesday, April 15th. Protesters stormed the Capitol building and demanded that the economy was reopened and for Governor Andy Beshear to act on facts, not fear. Their jeers during the governor's speech made it practically impossible to hear him. The governor reiterated that science and statistics do not show that they are even at halftime of the disease, and so he maintained his stance of social distancing and having citizens remain at home. Last Sunday, after the protest, was the worst day so far for Kentucky in regard to the coronavirus, with the most newly confirmed cases and deaths in one day. Another protest on April 15th was in Lansing, Michigan. Thousands of people flooded the downtown area of the capital of Michigan to protest while in their cars. The protest was created in response to the pushback date for the release of the stay-at-home orders by their governor, Gretchen Whitmer, until April 30th. The purpose of the protest was to create a vehicle gridlock in the downtown area to raise awareness that businesses need to reopen and the stay-at-home measures must be lifted. There were initial concerns that the gridlock would lead to delays for emergency services to get to and from the hospital in the area, but it was reported that there were no major problems. Raleigh, North Carolina, and Columbus, Ohio, reportedly also had similar protests take place as well. In our lessons we learned about emotions, we were told that both Democrats and Republicans tend to rely on their emotions over truth and look for information that gives them confirmation bias. This is very true for the protesters who want the economy to reopen. Current emotions that I've seen are anger, fear, and anxiety among these individuals. As we know, anger tends to make people incredibly partisan and unopen to opinions that don't align with their own. It can also lead people to potentially support riskier policies. Anger at the current state of the country is acceptable, but we were certainly not as well prepared as we would have liked, and the loss of jobs is no joke. But it is important that we stick to truths over emotions and discard the risky options, like reopening the economy at a time when thousands or even millions of lives could be put at risk. Fear and anxiety can also be dangerous emotions as well. Individuals who are fearful or anxious are hyper-focused on threats and try to be more cautious when they take in information. Anxiety has also been seen to influence people to drop their past experiences and make decisions based on current information. Relying on current information puts us in another precarious situation with the media. Misinformation spread on social media is a major problem with this disease, with many different conspiracies ranging from technology, politics, and healthcare running rampant. Agenda setting and priming have also been used on television news networks to downplay the virus. Some of the top news anchors on Fox News have been supporting the protests, along with encouraging the use of unproven medicines like hydroxychloroquine, which has shown doubts into their viewership in regard to how long the stay-at-home order will last. This has primed the conservative Fox News viewers to be overly critical of their state and local representatives in their handling of the crisis. Governors have been harassed on social media, and protests are staged to display their contempt for the current status of closures. As more governors reiterate that we are not yet at the top of the curve for the coronavirus cases, it is now more important than ever to stay home and socially distance. Mass gatherings for protests and reopening the economy risk further spread of the disease. It is vital to keep the narrative of staying home and socially distancing, because if a group decides to ignore the guidelines, others may begin to conform with them, and it will jeopardize the entire goal of social distancing. People could potentially join a group that is protesting or not social distancing because of normative influence, which is where they just want to fit in, or even through informational influence, where they think that the group knows more than them and can guide them. In regard to bounded rationality, protesters are seeking the satisfactory solution to their problem of being out of jobs and hurting economically by demanding to reopen the economy when it's not the optimal decision. The choice to reopen up businesses and allow for free travel could result in infecting countless more people and overflowing the maximum capacities of our healthcare system. People who are emotional tend to make choices like these based on circumstances as opposed to long-standing commitments, and this is dangerous. A level of trust is needed between you and your fellow Americans that we will successfully isolate ourselves and do our part in slowing down the virus. And we must stay committed to this over time, because it's currently the optimal decision. Although the protests have not turned violent yet, lessons can be taken from our section on riots and applied to the protests. The protesters are reacting to the loss of jobs and the crash of the economy and are stressed about their current status and future. A connection can even be drawn from our behavior to that of our biological cousins, monkeys. As we learned from the Monkey Hill massacre and other subsequent studies, primates, similar to humans, have shown that impoverished environments in captivity lead to more aggression. Mostly stuck in our homes today, with over 20% of working Americans unemployed, the situations are eerily similar. And with an exorbitant amount of misinformation intertwined with the facts about the coronavirus pandemic, it was only a matter of time until people grew too uneasy about staying at home. One reason that these nonviolent protests remain peaceful is due to the increased knowledge that we now have of how to manage them. It is important for authority to have a dialogue with the protesters from the beginning, so they see that the power structure recognizes the problems and plans to address them. Inciting violence with riot-controlled police action is not a correct method, but instead a presence that supports their right to safely protest in America. In Frankfort, Kentucky, for instance, a Kentucky State police officer was instructed not to confront the protesters, but to simply make sure that nobody entered the building. By keeping a non-confrontational approach, the likelihood that the protests would turn violent significantly lowered. Like many Americans, I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment and the right to protest. It is our duty as a people to fight for what we believe in. However, given the psychological analysis of why these protests are occurring, I believe that if it can be resolved with more knowledge and faith in each other. Misinformation may have a strong role in angering the protesters, along with the worsening state of the economy. It is critical that we need to find more ways to spread the facts and stop lies, along with keeping people believing in the power of staying at home and flattening the curve of the virus. News stations should be held accountable for any misinformation on their platforms, and we should work on potentially even some training on how to verify news and check your facts. And if people really need to go out and protest for their beliefs, let's make sure we wear masks and stay at least 6 feet apart. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.